Hello and welcome back to Population Health 1. This week and next week we're going to be talking about population health and data. So this lecture and materials will serve going forward for the next 2 weeks. So make sure you get through all of the readings and post to the discussion board. We're going to talk about some of the metrics that are going to be associated with various population health outcomes. As I talk about metrics, how to find metrics, what they mean, and what we do in research, I want you to be thinking about your population in particular and what you have already read when you reviewed the literature. How did they measure what you're interested in, for example? And then you're going to develop skills to evaluate some of the metrics that you've already seen for your population of interest, and I'm going to help you explore some additional ways that you could find other metrics for your population. And then we're going to talk a little bit about evidence-based recommendations and why using evidence-based materials are best for improving health outcomes in your population. So first I wanted to point out that research is different from evaluation. Hopefully you've already had a course on research methodology, hopefully more than one. Some folks may have already had a course in evaluation. And so I want to just point out that research is different in that research produces generalizable knowledge. So the goal of most published research findings out there are to use some large secondary data set like the CDC or to conduct a national generalizable survey, for example, asking people about their medical conditions or looking at electronic medical records and codes, data mining. So the purpose of research in general is different from evaluation because it's thinking about how do I make this generalizable to the larger population and not just referenced to a few select individuals or a region or a county or a town. These are usually researcher-derived questions. The setting is more controlled. You really have to control other environmental and external factors so that you can ensure that what you found, there is a relationship between the health outcome in your population. And one way to do that is to control other factors around you. There's a clear role of the researcher, and like I mentioned, research is most often published compared to evaluation. There is theoretical and empirical research. Well, why is this important? You have been asked to use theory in your paper. Theory is really important because it helps us have a framework of how the world works. And without that framework, you could be out there searching for a metric and it really has nothing to do with your population because it's not based in a theoretical or conceptual model. Empirical is the next level where you test that theory. And so you, based on the theory that you found, you understand what factors should be associated with the health of your population of interest. You need to go out there now and find empirical literature and knowledge and evidence-based practice recommendations based on all of those factors in your model. So you may have 5 factors that affect the health of your population in a certain theoretical framework or model that you've picked. Maybe you only want to explore 2 for this class. Then you go out and find metrics for those 2 ways of measuring health in your population. There are different types of studies, and they're usually on a linear pathway. Most studies are descriptive or correlational. Other studies can be causal. Causal is the gold standard, but causal usually comes after the descriptive and correlational studies have been done. Causal controls a lot of the factors in the environment, again, because it's so hard to say that this causes that. It's easier to say that there is a correlational relationship, these 2 are related. Not necessarily this causes this, but we know that these 2 are related. So if you take something like smoking, we've gone from describing the ill health effects of smoking on your lungs to correlating smoking with cancer to now we have clinical trials definitively showing that there is a causal relationship between cigarette smoking and lung cancer, for example. There are also two different types of research that I want to point out, because when you're looking through the literature and you're thinking about the metrics, I want you to understand why longitudinal studies are more powerful than cross-sectional studies. Cross-sectional studies measure at one point in time. Longitudinal studies measure two or more occasions. So you still may be doing a correlational or relational study when you review the literature, but if it's longitudinal, that's one step closer to understanding the relationships than cross-sectional. Cross-sectional just gives us a snapshot of what's happening. Longitudinal is more powerful. So when you're doing your lit review and you find some metrics to measure some health outcome in your population, or some behavior or some attitude in your population, whatever it is that you're measuring, longitudinal studies are better in terms of what they're able to say about the population. And this is just a quick reminder of what the IV and the DV are. When you're looking through, you need to make sure you understand that the variable that you manipulate or that leads to the outcome is the independent variable. So if someone's discussing an intervention and they're saying this program successfully helped people stop smoking, that's your IV. Right? And then stopping smoking would be your DV. That's the outcome. An illness, for example, if you're looking at cancer rates, health insurance, age, and then other examples of your dependent variable would be a physiological measure, quality of life, mortality, something like that. So make sure it's clear when you're looking for metrics that you understand what was being studied in the literature that you reviewed, what was being studied with the metric that you pick, and you're clear, at least in your mind, so that you can write about it in a meaningful way of what the IV and the DV were. So here's an example of where you can search to find some metrics or measures. Systematic reviews are really good because they do a lot of the work for you. So do meta-analyses. Meta-analyses really are one of the gold standards in terms of literature reviews, because they can put together, they synthesize for you all of the research in that area that you're focused in. So if you can find a meta-analysis on your topic, you are golden. They will have 2 or 3 pages probably on the different metrics or measures or surveys used to measure what you're interested in measuring, and then they will tell you which metrics, which measures, which surveys were most beneficial, most effective, which used longitudinal versus cross-sectional, different types of data. Systematic reviews come pretty close, and then you can also look for clinical or community health guidelines that are published to help you understand how to measure what you want to measure. Here are other databases I just wanted to point you to in case you were continuing to look. You've exhausted several different avenues and you're continuing to look, specifically pointing you toward systematic reviews. You can use the Cochrane database, other types of, here's the CDC down here as well. Another useful tool is to look within some sort of medical specialty. If you have a topic that is really there's not a whole lot of literature on it, there may be something within a specific medical specialty that does it. So for example, if you're looking at PTSD among veterans, you could look at the VA, see if they have recommendations, how do they measure PTSD clinically, what have they found, things like that. So that's a good way to narrow down. Again, using a systematic review or meta-analysis or some sort of published guideline is important because it's evidence-based. And we know now that evidence-based recommendations are the key to improving health outcomes and implementing and disseminating what you find. So it's the application of the best current scientific information to public health practice, and it's really important. It was in response to numerous case studies where the research is based on just 1 or 2 individuals. It was not systematic, it was not longitudinal, they didn't control for external factors, and it was really hard to generalize their findings beyond that one case control study, for example. So the characteristics of evidence-based practice is that it quantifies a public health issue. It's based on descriptive epi data. There is a health theory that is used to address the problem. Theory is, again, really important because it, within one model or framework, it tells you how different factors should be related, and you can test those different theories. The research and intervention approaches are based on the evidence that has been found, generalizable evidence in peer-reviewed literature. So several scientists have reviewed the literature before it is ever published, made their comments. And then it's a systematic evaluation of a research question or intervention. So in your paper, you're asked to not only find a metric, but also make a recommendation on how could you intervene based on what you measure, how often you measure it, based on what the problem is, based on all the work you've done in this class so far. What would you do to intervene to improve the population health outcome for your specific population? And so once you find a review, a meta-analysis, and they discuss interventions for your population and specific problem you've identified, you know that you've conducted a systematic evaluation and that you're using evidence-based literature and research to provide recommendations for that intervention. Some additional steps that I want you to think about. You can identify measures or instruments. So these can be surveys. And if you do find a survey that's on an attitude, a behavior, depending on what you're trying to measure, you can think about, is it qualitative, is it quantitative, is it mixed methods, is it valid and reliable? So before you pick a measure or an instrument, you want to know those things. Specifically, has it been shown to be valid and reliable in your population as used? This is another way to identify and avoid dead-end ideas. So if you have a particular topic and you think you have a measure, but you can't find that it's valid or reliable, you really want to stay away from it. It's going to lead you down a path that's not evidence-based. And then it will help you gather ideas on how to organize and write your paper, paying attention to the style and organization of others. So these meta-reviews and reviews have several different purposes. In addition to helping you identify measures or instruments or metrics that you could use that are valid and reliable, and avoid chasing, the wrong end of the spectrum, it will also show you how to best write a research paper where you can meaningfully talk about the metric and the intervention, because you will see how other people organize their research papers. This is something for you to keep in mind when you're identifying metrics. So conceptual versus operational definitions. A conceptual definition could be in your theory. It could be from a dictionary, it could be from a professional field. It is a big, broad concept. The operational definition is how you would actually measure it. So I've given you a couple of examples here because I think it's useful in taking your theory, the conceptual definition, and operationalizing it, which is what you're being asked to do when you pick a metric. So, for example, which of the following definitions of being computer literate is more operational and why? Is it having taken at least 2 formal courses of instruction on the use of computers in an accredited school? Or is it having the knowledge of the origins and uses of computers in modern society and their implications? I hope you said the first one. The first one is concrete. It is operational. It is how you would measure that someone had the knowledge of the origins and uses of computers in modern society and their implications. So if you're interested in someone's knowledge of computers and being computer literate, one way that you could measure it is, have they taken at least 2 formal courses of instruction in an accredited school? Let's try one more. Which of the following definitions of gregarious is more operational? Is it talking on the phone with friends for at least 2 hours each week? Or is it being open and friendly when in social gatherings with others? I think we would all agree that being open and friendly when in social gatherings with others is a definition of gregarious that we could find maybe in the dictionary. But then how would you actually measure it? You'd have to come up with something concrete that you could say, this person, yes, did it, or this person did not do it. And so talking on the phone with friends for at least 2 hours each week is something you could say, did the person talk for 2 hours each week, yes or no? And that's your operational definition. Something else that you'll be doing is providing a critical review. So why did we talk about cross-sectional versus longitudinal? Why did we talk about descriptive versus correlational? Because in the peer-reviewed literature, you're going to find a lot of different studies. And some studies are better than others. Longitudinal may be better than cross-sectional. Meta-analysis is going to be better than just one study. A tool that has been shown to be valid and reliable is going to be better than one that is not. So there are some common mistakes that people make when they're writing the metrics they would use to measure something in their population. First, they don't find a published survey. So it's key that you find a published survey, a published metric, something that has been shown to be valid and reliable. It is also key that you provide a critical review. Now, this does not mean that there's something wrong with every study you read and you point out the 3 or 4 things that are wrong in every study, or that you get a systematic review or a meta-analysis and you say, well, this is all just complete garbage because this hasn't been shown to be valid, this has only been measured one time, this has never been actually measured, quantitatively in the population. There are benefits and drawbacks to every study. One of the other mistakes people make is taking the results of each study as a fact that's been proven. Remember that a theory is a theory because it's providing guidance on relationships amongst variables and relationships. So it's a theory or a hypothesis because it hasn't been proven. And there really aren't a whole lot of things that have been 100% proven. One of the things that we, quote, know, for example, would be smoking and lung cancer. Not everything has been shown with that rigor across, different types of studies. So don't take everything you read as if it's been proven. Take it as they found a relationship, a correlational relationship between variables that seem to suggest something. Discuss all studies as if they're equal in quality. So this is related. There are going to be sampling differences. Different studies are going to use different metrics, and different studies are going to use different study designs. So if you find a longitudinal study and you also find a cross-sectional study, you would probably put a little more weight on the longitudinal study. So when you're writing your section, you would say, 4 longitudinal studies have suggested that this scale could be used to measure PTSD in the veteran population, for example. This scale has been successfully used in the veteran population. It has been shown to be valid and reliable over time, because that's really what longitudinal means. And so there are different ways that you can write about it that show you're providing a critical review and you understand everything that you've read within the context for your population and within those metrics that you find for measurement. Here's some additional different places that you could go if you're interested in reading more about measurement and testing, different types of things that have been used for measurement in different fields. I think that these are really useful to peruse. So that concludes our lecture for population health and data. Please let me know if you have questions. And of course, we will be very responsive to emails about any metrics that you find, any literature that you find, just to see if you are on the right track, as long as you get those to us beforehand.